Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I wish I could say I saw it coming, that I'd always known deep down where I stood in the family hierarchy, but the truth is, I didn't want to believe it, not even when it was staring me in the face, cold and unapologetic. It started with a dull ache in my side, the kind you convince yourself is nothing because life doesn't have room for anything else, not when you're juggling rent, a job that barely covers groceries, and the hollow echo of "you'll be fine" from people who are supposed to love you. The diagnosis wasn't life-threatening, technically benign growths, the doctor said, but painful and dangerous if left unchecked. Surgery was recommended. Not urgent, but soon. The cost? $19,000 with insurance, up front. I remember holding the bill in my hands like it was a bomb I didn't know how to disarm. I called my parents that night, pacing my apartment barefoot because the floorboards had started to splinter again and I couldn't afford new ones. I told them everything, the symptoms, the risk, the recommendation, the cost, and I still remember the pause. A long inhale from my mother, a slow exhale from my father, like they were preparing to deliver a eulogy instead of an answer. "Jess, honey, we'd help if we could," my mom said, her voice so soft I almost missed the dagger inside it. "But things are tight this year. The market's been brutal. You know how it is." I said nothing. My father cleared his throat, added something about how this was a tough season for everyone and how maybe I could wait it out a bit, see if it gets better on its own. I did what they couldn't. I made it work. I drained what little I had in savings, took on extra shifts at the firm, stopped contributing to my 401k, and put off anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I gave up yoga, date nights, even stopped taking the train and started walking 3 miles to work to save on fare. The pain got worse before it got better, and by the time the surgery was over, I was 8 pounds lighter and 3 months behind on rent. I didn't ask for help again. Not once. Nathan, my younger brother, was always between things, between jobs, between leases, between breakups, and yet somehow always landed on something soft. When he got laid off, Mom and Dad covered his rent. When his girlfriend cheated on him, Dad helped him hire a lawyer for a custody battle over a dog. When he wanted to take a break from the city and reconnect with nature, Mom made him a care package with homemade granola and CBD bath salts. They called it support. I called it denial wrapped in expensive ribbon. Last fall, I came home for the weekend. I hadn't planned to, but my mom insisted. Said they missed me, said she was making my favorite, that dry, overcooked turkey breast she thought I loved because I told her once, at age 9, that it tasted like clouds. I drove the 4 hours in silence, window cracked just enough to remind me I could leave whenever I wanted. The house looked the same as always, overly beige, overly curated, with that faint smell of lilacs and disappointment. Nathan was already there, barefoot in the kitchen with a craft beer in hand and some startup hoodie draped over one shoulder like he'd invented the word venture. I was upstairs when I heard it. My dad on the phone, loud and cheerful in that way he only ever was when talking to people who didn't live in the house. Yep, wired him the full amount this morning. 200 grand. Clean. Should close on the place next week. Yeah, lakefront. Needs a little work, but it's got potential. I froze halfway down the hallway, mouth dry, heart pounding like I'd just sprinted a marathon. $200,000. That's what he said. Not 20. Not 50. 200,000 for Nathan, for a place on a lake, and not a word about how tight things were. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I turned and walked downstairs, legs heavy, head spinning. My mom was setting the table, humming to herself like she hadn't just rewritten the laws of fairness. She smiled when she saw me. "Sweetheart, can you grab the cranberry sauce from the fridge?" I did, because I didn't know what else to do. Dinner was quiet. Nathan talked about his plans for renovations and how the water pressure wasn't great, but he'd figure it out. My dad nodded proudly. My mom said it was a dream come true. I stared at my plate, fork unmoving. Later that night, while looking for an extra blanket in the downstairs cabinet, I found a stack of tax documents in an open envelope with my mom's name on it. The top form caught my eye, a digital transfer dated the same week I'd asked them for help. The amount read $200,000 exactly, next to the words, "Wire transfer to N. Carlisle, property assistance." My fingers went cold. I read it again, just to be sure. And then again. Same date. Same month. Same week I'd cried on the phone, begging them to help me avoid a medical bankruptcy. I folded the document slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and shut the cabinet door. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, not yet, but because something inside me had finally broken, quietly, like a rubber band stretched one pull too far. And once it snapped, I knew something else would eventually have to snap too, but this time, it wouldn't be me. The next morning came with weak sunlight and the lingering taste of burnt coffee, the kind my mother always brewed too strong, like she thought bitterness could replace sincerity. I sat at the edge of the guest bed, envelope still in hand, though I'd read the contents enough times to memorize the exact placement of every printed digit. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, whether it would come out as a question or an accusation, but I knew I needed to say something before I left that house with more silence than I could carry. She was in the kitchen, folding a dish towel, her back to me like always when things got hard. "Mom," I said, my voice low but steady, "what's this?" I held out the envelope, bracing myself for the performance I knew was coming. She turned slowly, blinked at the paperwork like it was written in a language she'd never studied, then gave a soft, breathy laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, that was just something we had to do to help Nathan. He was in a bad place, Jess. You know how hard things have been for him." I didn't respond right away because the heat rising up my throat made it hard to speak without either screaming or crying, and I didn't want to do either. "You told me you couldn't help me with my surgery. You said things were tight." And that was the same month. The same week, Mom. She pressed a hand to her chest like I'd accused her of murder instead of favoritism. "Sweetheart, it wasn't like that. You're strong. You always find a way. Nathan, he needed a place to reset, to feel secure. And the house, it's an investment for the family." I stared at her, unsure whether I wanted to laugh or vomit. "An investment for the family? Is that what we're calling it now?" She bristled, her mouth tightening. "Don't be dramatic, Jessica. You've always had a flair for that." There it was, the dismissal wrapped in faux concern, the script she recited every time I dared to expect fairness. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even take the leftover pie she tried to hand me on my way out. I just got in the car, drove in silence, and let the weight of that moment sink deeper than I expected it to. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a call from Nathan. I thought about ignoring it, but some sick part of me wanted to hear what he'd say, if he'd even try to lie. "Jess," he said, cheerful and smug, like nothing had happened. "So Mom told me you're pissed about the house thing. Come on, it's not like you were dying." He actually said those exact words, like my pain was just an inconvenience to his fun. "It's just money," he added with a chuckle. "You know they do the same for you." That was the moment something inside me calcified. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just hung up mid-sentence and blocked his number so fast my hands shook. The next few weeks were a strange blend of relief and rage, like my body finally understood it was allowed to stop hoping. I blocked the family group chat too, the one where they kept sending cheerful photos from the lake house, wine glasses clinking, fire pits glowing, Nathan grinning like he'd earned something. I didn't block my mother, though. Not yet. She still texted now and then, always gentle, always passive, little updates like, "The leaves are so beautiful this year," or, "Dad grilled salmon last night. Thought of you." I didn't reply, but I read them, because part of me still needed to see how far they'd go pretending nothing had happened. About 3 weeks into radio silence, she sent a photo of a Thanksgiving wreath she'd made, all rustic and fake sentimental, and wrote, You should come to the lake house this year. Nate says he'll grill. He's gotten so good at it. I reread the message 5 times, fingers trembling not from sadness, but disbelief. That's when the idea started to form, slow and sharp like frost creeping along a windowpane. Not a petty reaction. Not some dramatic confrontation. No, I wanted something better. I wanted silence that spoke louder than any words I'd ever said. Because here's the thing, I remember being 24 when it all started, which means it lasted almost 18 years by now, a stretch of time I didn't even realize had passed until I stopped to count it. Yes, I know the math doesn't add up. That's what happens when your body gets used to being in pain. Time bends around survival until logic just disappears. Somewhere in those years, I stopped asking why and started accepting. And now I was done doing either. I spent the next few days researching the lake house, quietly, meticulously, with a calmness that surprised even me. I called an old friend from high school who is now a real estate agent, just to get a sense of the property market out there, casually mentioning the address, playing dumb about why I was asking. What she told me made my breath catch. The house wasn't in Nathan's name. It wasn't even listed as his. It was in my parents' names, held in trust for estate simplification purposes. Which meant if anything happened, Nathan had no legal claim. And that was interesting. I stared at the lake house photos they'd posted in the group chat weeks earlier. The wraparound deck, the dock, the tiny boat with the peeling paint. I thought about the money I'd spent on surgery, the months I spent eating canned soup and skipping therapy to make up the difference. I thought about the pain, the sleepless nights, the lies, the laughter that came too easily from people who didn't care if I was okay as long as I stayed quiet about not being okay. So when my mother's text lit up my screen again that evening, I didn't block her. I didn't reply either. I just stared at it until the battery died and the screen went dark, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't confused about what to do. I was just waiting for the right moment to do it. I didn't respond to her invitation right away, mostly because I wanted her to wonder what I was thinking, to feel that little itch of discomfort that comes when silence replaces compliance. It took me 3 full days to answer, and when I finally did, I kept it brief. Sure. I'll be there. Let me know what time dinner starts. I didn't say I was excited. I didn't ask who else would be there. I didn't pretend anything had changed. But I could practically hear her exhale through the screen, like my message had saved her from having to explain my absence to whoever she was trying to impress this year. The truth was, I didn't agree to go because I missed them or because I wanted to smooth things over. I agreed to go because I needed to see the place myself, needed to stand on the property my parents paid for with the money they claimed they didn't have when I needed help to stay functional. I needed to feel the walls of that house, smell the wood, taste the air, and gather the details that could only come from being present. You can't dismantle something you've never stepped inside. That was the difference between petty revenge and strategic retribution, the ability to be patient, to wait until the silence becomes information. Before I left, I called Annie, a girl I hadn't spoken to in over a decade but remembered clearly as the only person in high school who didn't pretend to be someone else. She answered after 2 rings, her voice sharper and more confident than I remembered. Jess Carlisle? Wow. Blast from the past. You okay? I didn't waste time with nostalgia. I told her I needed a favor, promised it was nothing illegal, and gave her the address to the lake house. She said she'd call me back in 20 minutes. 17 minutes later, she did. You were right to be curious, she said, and I could hear her leaning and even through the phone. The deed's not in Nathan's name. It's listed under Alan and Linda Carlisle. A trust, technically, which means he doesn't own squat. They do. I didn't even smile. It wasn't funny yet, but it would be. The lake house was beautiful in the way expensive things often are, polished, sterile, curated to look effortless. White stone steps led to a heavy oak door, and inside, everything smelled like pine and leather and fake gratitude. My mom greeted me with too much energy, her hug too long, her smile too desperate. Nathan sauntered in from the back patio wearing boat shoes and a smug expression that I'd never quite wanted to slap more than in that moment. "Well, well," he said, arms spread like he expected applause. "The prodigal sister returns. Let me guess, you finally ran out of TV dinners." I said nothing at first, just walked past him and set down my bag, but I made a mental note of his tone, the way he still treated me like I was a failed version of himself. Dinner was tense from the beginning, every sentence threaded with something sharp, every toast feeling more like a dare. My dad was unusually quiet, chewing slower than usual, as if the act of eating somehow protected him from having to address anything meaningful. My mom asked about work, then interrupted before I could answer. Nathan laughed a little too hard at his own joke about my eternal singleness and the joys of not having to share a mortgage. That's when I put my glass down and tilted my head slightly, letting my voice drop just enough to sound casual without being cold. "I actually just signed on a beach property down the road," I said, watching the fork freeze in Nathan's hand. "Figured I'd invest like you did. Make the most of my savings." The room stilled in a way that only happens when everyone hears something they didn't expect. My mom blinked. My dad glanced up. Nathan let out a little laugh, forced and nervous, like he wasn't sure if I was joking. "Wait, seriously?" he asked, and I just smiled. "Oh yeah," I said. "It's not as big as this one, but I liked the view. Plus, the soil's more stable. No drainage issues like some of the spots up here have." I let that hang in the air just long enough to sting, then picked up my wine glass again and took a slow sip. They didn't know what to say after that, so we finished dinner in a fog of awkwardness and empty platitudes. Nathan excused himself to take a call. My mom offered pie I didn't want. My dad made a weak comment about interest rates. I said goodnight and slipped outside without another word, walking the path that led down toward the dock. The water was still, the stars reflecting back at me like tiny witnesses to the quiet unraveling of a very old lie. I walked farther than I needed to, past the bend where the property line blurred, and into the edge of the undeveloped lots. That's where I saw it, the broken retaining wall, the erosion creeping dangerously close to the wooden footpath, the beer cans half buried in dirt, the leaning fence post someone had tried to stabilize with duct tape. I took my phone out of my pocket and started snapping photos, careful to get the angles right, to make it clear this wasn't just neglect, it was liability. Trash, water damage, cracked stone near the stairwell, all of it documented. I even caught a picture of a small pipe draining runoff directly into the lake, a violation I remembered reading about in a local housing complaint article last year. By the time I returned to the guest room, I'd already drafted an anonymous email. The subject line was direct: Lakeview HOA, urgent violations, lot number 37. I attached the photos, listed my concerns using phrases I knew would trigger a formal response: environmental risk, public safety, community devaluation. I hit send and watched the screen flash back to my inbox, calm and quiet like nothing had happened. But something had. Something had started. And unlike every time before, I wasn't going to be the one apologizing for it. I crawled into bed with the hum of the lake outside my window and a weight in my chest that felt different from the usual ache. This wasn't regret. It wasn't even anger. It was something sharper, something more focused. I didn't need them to feel pain. I just needed them to feel something that couldn't be explained away by a family photo or a carefully worded Christmas card. For once, they were going to have to sit with discomfort, and this time, I wasn't going to fix it. It took less than a week for the email I sent to do its quiet damage, a ripple that turned into a wave the moment the HOA board received it and started poking around Nathan's beloved weekend palace. I didn't hear anything directly, of course. That would have made it too easy, but the first clue came in the form of a long, furious paragraph from Nathan in the family group chat titled "A Total Joke of a Fine," followed by a blurry photo of a notice taped to the front door of the lake house, and a rant about how someone, with too much time and not enough spine, had clearly made it their personal mission to sabotage him. He used the phrase malicious jealousy more than once, which made me laugh out loud in a way I hadn't in months. According to his meltdown, the HOA had issued a formal warning about improper drainage, shoreline erosion violations, and an unapproved modification to the lower patio that they claimed could be destabilizing the slope. He called it a complete overreach and insisted they were targeting him because he was young and successful, which was honestly generous, considering that most people in their mid-30s with no actual income and a house they don't own tend to be called dependent rather than successful. My mom responded with a soothing, "We'll get it sorted, sweetie," followed by a smiling photo of the lake at sunset, as if natural beauty could erase structural instability or legal noncompliance. My dad said nothing, which was his way of being present without offering support, a skill he'd mastered decades ago. I didn't reply. I just let the fire burn itself out. Nathan was too narcissistic to believe anyone in the family would ever do something so calculated and quiet, so I was safe. And besides, I had something else on my mind, something that had started as a coping mechanism and was quickly becoming something much bigger. About a month earlier, when the texts and calls had first started to wear me down, I'd started recording little voice memos into my phone. Not rants, not diary entries, but more like reflections, thoughts about what it feels like to be the family's afterthought, what happens when love is conditional, and how money becomes the loudest language in a house that won't say what it really means. I called the project Daughter Margin, a name that sounded vague enough to keep my anonymity safe, but meaningful enough to attract people who knew exactly what I meant. I uploaded the first 3 episodes to a free podcasting platform under a new account and didn't tell a single soul it was me. No names, no specific references, just stories carefully crafted, emotionally raw, and painfully honest. Episode 1 was titled, "You're Strong, So You Don't Need Help." Episode 2 was The Cost of Being the Backup Plan. By the time I posted Episode 3, Gaslight, Gatekeep, Gratitude, it had been shared over 100 times and downloaded by thousands of people who all seemed to know someone like my family. What surprised me most wasn't the numbers, it was the comments. Dozens of messages from strangers thanking me for saying the things they were never allowed to say at the dinner table. Women, especially, wrote long notes about how they'd been the responsible one, the one expected to be fine without help, the one who was never really allowed to fail because her brother already took up all the emergency energy. I read every comment. I replied to none of them. I didn't need to be known. I just needed to be heard, and that's a very different thing. Of course, the timing couldn't stay perfect forever. A few days after Nathan's group chat tantrum, my mom called me. Not a text. Not a voicemail. An actual phone call, which in our world was practically a distress signal. I let it ring twice, considered ignoring it, then answered with a flat hey. She launched straight into her concern, like it had been bubbling up for weeks. "Sweetheart, I feel like you've been so distant lately," she said, as if that observation hadn't been true for the last 10 years. "Is something going on? I just want to make sure we're okay." I paused for a second, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted her to sit in the silence long enough to feel its weight. Then I clicked the record button on my phone and switched to speaker. "You paid for my brother's comfort while I bled out in the bathroom," I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. "That's why I'm distant." And I hung up. No follow-up call came. No message. No over-explaining or defensiveness. Just quiet. For 3 full days. In that stillness, something shifted. Not in them, but in me. Because for once, the silence wasn't punishment, it was power. They didn't know how to respond without control, without a narrative they could twist or soften or frame with their usual filters. And I didn't give them one. I didn't post anything new on the podcast that week. I didn't send Annie a follow-up about the house. I didn't reply to the group chat. I let it all simmer, and the satisfaction came not from vengeance, but from restraint, from knowing that I didn't need to scream to be heard. On the 4th day, a new message came in, not from my mother, but from my dad. Just 3 words, "Let's talk soon." No punctuation. No emotion. No apology. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry that had burned out long ago, but because I didn't trust them to listen now any more than I had trusted them back then. And besides, the next episode of Daughter Margin practically wrote itself. I already knew what I was going to call it. Built on sand. The envelope arrived 2 days before Christmas, oversized and decorated with metallic snowflakes that glittered under the hallway light, the kind of design that screamed festive in the most performative, Pinterest-inspired way imaginable. I recognized my mother's handwriting before I even touched it, that perfectly rounded, over-practiced cursive she always used for holiday cards and passive-aggressive reminders taped to the fridge. For a moment, I considered tossing it straight into the recycling bin, unopened and untouched, like a ritual cleansing of old obligations. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and something told me this one wasn't just another glossy update on Nathan's imaginary success or a forced reminder of family unity. I opened it with the same detachment you'd have dissecting a frog in 10th grade biology, slow, deliberate, already half disgusted by what you know you're going to find. Inside was the annual photo card, and it was even worse than I expected. The entire family posed on the lake house deck, sun setting behind them like a stock image backdrop. My mom wore a red scarf and clutched a wine glass like it was a trophy. My dad stood stiff and detached in the background, and Nathan stood front and center, holding up a fishing rod with a crooked smile, like some budget version of a GQ cover boy who just discovered trout. In silver metallic ink, across the bottom of the photo, they'd scrawled the words, "We miss you, Jess," complete with an exclamation point, as if I were away at summer camp instead of deliberately exiled from a family that still pretended I had just slipped away. There was no letter inside, no apology, no invitation. Just the picture, beaming with fake joy, and the sentence that tried to cover a crater with a Christmas bough. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I set the card down on my kitchen counter, poured myself a drink that was stronger than it needed to be, and opened my laptop. If they were going to send out their carefully polished lie wrapped in silver ink and seasonal cheer, then I was going to send out the truth, raw, unfiltered, and wrapped in something much sharper. It took me an hour to write, and when I finished, I read it back once without making a single edit. Then I posted it everywhere I could: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn for good measure. The headline read, "When your parents choose a lake house over your health," bold, unmissable, and impossible to misinterpret. Below it was my sarcastic holiday newsletter, written in the style of the ones families used to send out in the 90s, full of ironic cheer and pointed honesty. I included updates like Jessica successfully healed from surgery she paid for alone, using money she could have spent on rent, joy, or literally anything else, and this year, Jessica learned that love, apparently, comes with a dollar value. And hers didn't quite cover the cost of honesty. I listed my podcast success in bullet points, referencing over 50,000 downloads, top charts in the mental health category, and thousands of direct messages from people who said my words helped them confront their own family betrayal. At the end of the post, I added a link not for merch or self-promotion, but for donations to a verified women's surgery fund, one I knew had helped people like me when their families told them no with a smile. I wrote, "Since my family couldn't afford compassion, maybe yours can afford a little help for someone else." By the end of the day, the post had been shared more than 12,000 times. Comments poured in, some supportive, some horrified, some sharing their own similar stories with gut-wrenching detail. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. I had said everything I came to say. But I wasn't done just yet. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, I contacted a local billboard company that had a stretch of highway just outside the lakefront community where my parents had bought Nathan his sanctuary. The man on the phone said there was one open panel left, facing the road into the neighborhood, visible from every car that passed the entrance. What he wanted to say, he asked, and I didn't even hesitate. Some kids get love. Some get lake houses. I paid up front. No installment plan. No hesitation. It went up the morning after Christmas. I didn't hear from my parents for weeks. Not a call, not a text, not a single attempt at their usual guilt-laced reconciliation tactics. Just silence. And it was perfect. It was the kind of silence I had earned, not the kind that gets forced on you when you're told to be strong or stopped being dramatic. No, this silence was mine. And I wore it like armor. Months passed. Spring came and went. The podcast kept growing, new episodes recorded from the quiet of my apartment, my voice steadier with each one. I traveled. I laughed. I finally started sleeping without waking up at 3 a.m. wondering why I wasn't enough. And then, one Sunday afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months, my parents' home line, the one they only used for important calls. I stared at the screen, the name glowing at me like a memory I'd outgrown. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second, maybe two. Then I flipped the phone over, face down on the table, and let it ring. 10 seconds of noise. Then silence again. The good kind. The kind you choose.